Yeah, I mean, I get up in the morning and I go straight into the studio and I try to work till dinner. And then after dinner, we watch TV or something, and while everybody goes to bed, I go back in the studio and I work a little bit. So it's being self-employed. It's on a good day, it's like you don't have a job because you're just playing. And plus, I watch TV while I'm working, so that's really good. That's what I hate about writing. Can't watch TV. So it's kind of like I'm not working. But on a bad day, you're very conscious of the fact that you're always at work. You know, I've always had a studio in the home. I can't imagine what it'd be like to go someplace to go to work, because other than the film stuff, which I did like that, you know, if I came home from my studio or somewhere in the middle of dinner, I'd be going, that nose I drew, I gotta go fix that. I just have to go down the hall and fix it. I don't have to, take a bus to my studio and go and fix the nose. So, it's just the way I live. It's not a clear-cut job. It's more of a lifestyle. He needs a microphone.
I'll beat you to it.
Yeah, excellent.
Being a writer and an artist, do you find that you write the character first, or you draw the character first and then write a story around the character?
It's a really hard one to. It's a hard question to answer because there is no easy answer. I still don't know quite how these things come about. All the bits and pieces of this stuff rattle around in my head. So the stories cook for a long time before I sit down and do them. I need them cooked to a certain extent in the back of my head before I can sit down and start doing thumbnails. But I don't ever sit down and write a script. I do, as I'm always working on 10 or 12 different stories or in various stages of development. So especially when I'm taking a shower is where I do 90% of my plotting. So I'm always coming out of the shower and running and getting a pad of paper and writing down strings of dialogue. So I have all these different folders for different stories, and a lot of it is just characters talking to each other. But when I actually come down to finally work on a story, it's always plotted loose enough in my head that when I sit down to do my thumbnails, there's a certain amount of organic make up the story as you go along. Like I always know how a story begins. I always know how a story ends. I think I know how it ends. And I have my certain things I've got to hit somewhere in the middle of the story. But then when I do my thumbnails, there's a lot of organic, well, he goes through here and then, yeah, it kind of seems like he should do this and do this and do this. It's a very weird process, but to a certain extent the story does kind of go where it's going. I just try to steer it. And like I said, it started here, it kind of meanders, and I go, well, it can meander for a while, but as long as it gets to this place eventually. And then it can meander a little bit, but it's got to get here. If that makes any sense at all. A lot of the Hellboy stuff really took on a life of its own once I started doing it. And my original idea with Hellboy was he was just going to be a regular guy. I mean, he was going to look like the devil, but he would just be a regular guy. And we have this little origin sequence at the beginning, which didn't really say where what he was. He wasn't going to be the beast of the apocalypse or anything else. It was just going to be funny that here's the good guy and he looks like the devil. And then I thumbnailed the sequence. This is why I write little bits of dialogue now and I didn't used to do that. I would just start thumbnailing the story. So I thumbnailed this story, the second Hellboy miniseries, and he fights the goddess Hecate. And I had fun thumbnailing this whole fight sequence, but when it came to, and I drew it, and then when it came to scripting it, I realized I had no idea what these characters would say to each other. And the fight went on and on and on, and you can only do that, kind of, whoa, look out, You can only do that, I can only do it for 2 or 3 panels. I can't write that Spider-Man, like snappy lingo as you're fighting kind of stuff. So I had nothing for these guys to say to each other. So the goddess Hecate started saying, and this makes me sound like a lunatic. It wasn't like I was hearing voices, but I thought, well, what if she says this and this and this? And so this prophecy of Hellboy kind of, happened. And I'm kind of sitting there going, really? Okay, but it was written real vague and stuff. And then, as the series went on, you kind of kept picking away at this little prophecy and adding little bits to it, and it went in this direction I never anticipated. And in fact, there's one story where a character is yakking about Hellboy's fate, and Hellboy says, I've had it with all this Beast of the Apocalypse crap. That's because that's me. That's me going, shut up. I don't want to do that. I don't want the character to be that. But once you've started down that path, it is like that snowball's rolling downhill, and it's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And the character of Hellboy took over the comic. The comic was never supposed to be about him. It was supposed to be about supernatural stories, and this was my main character who went in and solved problems, which is why we ended up having to do the BPRD series, because there was no more, there was no more room in the book for the other characters. They just got squeezed out because Hellboy took over that book. And then, believe me, there's still days where I go, why did I start it like this? Why did I, oh man, King Arthur, no, come on. I said, what were they thinking? But yeah, the thing just takes on a kind of life of its own.
I have one question about your vampires. You mentioned in the beginning when you were reading Bram Stoker's. Now, of course, through times, there's been hundreds of vampires and stories. With all of the booming that's been coming out about vampires, what would your vampire character be like? Would you want to draw your own comic with that character? And is it a possibility you may ever do one?
Considering how much I love vampires, I've done very little with them in Hellboy, and very few traditional vampires, if any. We just did this series, BPRD 1947, which the first time, because the story was taking place in the 40s, I felt I could do the real cliche vampire hunter thing where guys actually have crosses and stakes and they go into a cellar to unearth vampires. And I love that. I love the old school kind of stuff. And I introduced a vampire character in BPRD 1946 who we killed off in BPRD 1947. And for whatever reason, a lot of the stories I've had floating around the back of my head lately involve fairly traditional vampire characters. So there's a book I've actually got to start writing when I get home that another artist is going to draw, which will give a little bit more background on how vampires function in the Hellboy universe. There are 2 or 3 different stories currently in the mental works that are my take on vampires. So you'll be seeing a lot more vampires, in the future. But I like the old traditional, even before Stoker, I hate rules and regulations. I hate, vampire doesn't have a reflection, vampire doesn't do this, vampire doesn't do that. If you go back before Bram Stoker Dracula, even around the time of the Stoker Dracula, there was a lot more flexibility with vampires. Vampires, they weren't, they were closer to ghosts. A vampire could inhabit a portrait. A vampire could, be a shadow. A vampire could be this. And if you go back to the folklore, it's even weirder. Vampire turns into a piece of straw. It turns into a beetle. It's whatever the hell you want. And that's what I like. I hate doing supernatural stuff that has rules. Because to me, as soon as there's rules, it becomes science fiction. As soon as you know 2 + 2 = 4, as soon as you know to kill a vampire, you've got to do this. It's not supernatural anymore. To me, there's got to be an element that is beyond human comprehension. And I've got my vague idea of how things work, so I've got my own kind of, what Del Toro and I refer to as fairy tale logic. There's a way that seems right to me, and maybe I know mechanically how certain things work, but I'm never going to spell it out for the audience, because there has to be a, oh shit, I didn't see that coming. Certain things have to happen just because they're weird and they're cool.